Hi, my name is Chase Sanu, and we're going to be continuing the conversation on this podcast just about men, and we're going to specifically be talking about manhood in the world today and how it affects us personally, but also just men in the world as a whole, and the roadblocks that we have into coming to God as men in the world. So we're going to go ahead and kind of jump in with that question and see where it goes, and I hope that it helps you.
Well, my name is Mike, and when I think about manhood, I just think about, like, I think there's this impression that we got to be strong. We have to have it all figured out. We have to have the answers. And I think a lot of times, even for me, like, I think about the pressure that I put on myself to portray this strength. So that's one of the things I think about when it comes to manhood.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that, like, I think the thought of, like, men being strong is a fair thought, right? But I think it's been misconstrued. Like, I think that when you think about strength in doing hard things, I think that it's kind of flipped in the world today, right? Like, a lot of the things that's looked at as manhood is actually, like, the easy way out, right? Like, how many people can you sleep with? Like, how strong are you? Like, that stuff's, like, you know, you can do that. It's not that difficult. But I think, like, being reliable is difficult. Like, being a man of your word is difficult. Like, telling the truth is difficult, right? And so people say that, like, men do the strong things, right? Or men should be strong or whatever. But I think it's more looked at now as, like, manhood is more so like the easy way out, and not really strength. Or strength is misconstrued. And so I think it's kind of interesting that, like, it's just been, and we allow the world, and specifically, like, women as well, to, like, define what strength is in a man, instead of, you know, what we believe, like, God in the Bible and the scriptures define what strength is. And I think when you look at the scriptures and you see men that you want to emulate, it's them doing things, going against the grain, right? It's doing the difficult thing. And now strength is kind of like just going with the crowd and kind of doing the easy thing, and, you know, looking like, oh, I have all these good things, or I'm able to, you know, have all these desires or whatever, but it's really the easy thing to do, right? And so I think that, to me, that's where I kind of see this rub of kind of, you know, what the initial thought was is, what's the reason why it's difficult, like, for men to come to God? Like, what are the roadblocks? And I think it's because they fed into this lie. So, yeah, and I think it's sad to see, and it's become a fallacy that's become the truth in a lot of people's minds. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what's interesting about the strength aspect too is, as a man, no one wants to be perceived as weak, right? No one wants to be perceived as less than. So it's like, I need to be strong so that way I can be this man, right? And even a lot of those things that you mentioned, like, you know, pursuing success or relationships, like, a lot of those things are external, but a lot of being a man happens in here, and that. It's the opposite of the easy way out. You know, having integrity, being humble, being able to lead with wisdom, like, those aren't things that you can just necessarily do on your own, like, on a whim, but you need guidance, you need something deeper. And it's amazing that the scriptures provide the best guidance that we could possibly ask for, because the wisdom of the world and the wisdom from heaven is just, it's literally night and day.
Yeah, I'm glad you're talking about wisdom, because, like, I've actually been thinking about, like, wisdom and thinking about decision making, and I feel like a lot of times decisions are based off what's happening in the moment and what feels good in the moment, as opposed to looking at the bigger picture. And I think a lot of times what you were saying, Chase, in terms of, like, okay, I'm gonna be strong because I get to make a decision about dominating something right now, or, like, I don't know, a lot of times strength can be perceived as, hey, make a decision right now. And sometimes when you don't think things through, I think about my own life, where I don't think things through, it backfires, you know? So that's kind of how I think about, like, decision making, strength. I know we're going in a bunch of directions, but that's kind of how I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because exactly what you said makes me kind of think of, like, in my opinion, it's kind of like the story that illustrates what manhood today has become. And it's like the story of Samson, right? Like, the things that, like, the world looks at as strength was portrayed as weakness to God in Samson's life, right? Like, the things that, showed his strength and also his weakness of women, like those type of things were him disobeying God, though. Even when he showed the strength that he had and he went after women, it was perceived as weakness in God's eyes. And even like it became his literal weakness. A woman cut his hair, he loses his strength. And then even when he does display his strength again, it's because God allowed him to, right? And so I think like that's kind of what I perceive the world is thinking of strength now, is it's like we have a manhood of Samson where it's like, I'm going to show off my strength despite whether it's like hurting other people or disobeying God or whatever, I'm going to chase relationships, whether it's whatever it may be, And so I think that we've created this culture where all the things that were perceived as weakness in God's eyes for Samson is now perceived as strength in everyone else's eyes. And I think that, that's a layered story, right? There's a lot of things to it. And I think that that's kind of what the world has become, where it's where we take the things that God sees as weakness and we look at it as strengths because it feels good in the moment, like Mike was saying. And I think that exactly what, to your point, is that if you don't think it through, it will be your downfall. And I think that that's crazy, is that in the moment you're like, this is great, this is getting me everything that I want, and in reality it's really destroying your life. And so I think that, unfortunately, I think that's where we are in society as men today. And I think that because you're trying to please the world and show like, I don't have any weaknesses, I don't have any cracks, and I think that's why we have this epidemic of mental health stuff, and people don't want to show their emotion. And I think that, again, like that is the hard thing, is to show weakness, is to show emotion, like as a man kind of thing. And I think that's why we have so many men in the world that are unwilling to say what they're really feeling, say what they're really thinking, get the help that they actually need, kind of thing. When if you lived this way, right, how God intended, to have community, to have people around you to help you, that you wouldn't have all these things inwardly to have to battle through, And I think we're creating these demons within ourselves of like not being willing to share what's going on in our lives, not being willing to share our feelings and our emotions and our weaknesses and cracks and all those things. And it's becoming something where it affects, marriages, it affects parenthood, it affects, friendships, all these things, to where if we just lived in strength the way God shows us strength, that these things wouldn't be as much of an issue.
How do you guys think we break that perception, or men are to break that perception? Because all our lives, right, we're told this is strong, this is how you need to be, this is what it looks like to be a man. So what does that road to transition look like to, wow, like God's perception of strength is completely different, and beautiful, honestly.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because I think you have to go like very controversial, right, to what the world's telling us, to where now, like, speaking of like mental health and things like that, it's kind of become these like buzzwords where now whenever there's an issue or whenever we've made a mistake, sometimes it just gets chalked up to like, oh, I really need to work on my mental health, right? And it's not to say, again, like mental health, as I was saying before, is a real thing and it's something we need to deal with. But also, I think it starts, to answer your question, I think it starts with taking personal responsibility. Like, I got myself in this situation. Like, my mental health might now be affected by this, but I'm the one that got me here. You know what I mean? Like, I do think that we also live in a society where the men and everybody, not just men, but, for myself even, like, to look back on things that have hurt me or things in my past and be like, well, if this person hadn't, like, then I wouldn't be here, kind of thing, right? When, sure, there might be times when you're affected by someone else's actions, but I think taking personal responsibility for your own actions first, I think, is the first step in moving towards that. And I think that will give you the humility to be able to accept what God is trying to teach us about our own lives, and having personal discipline and reading his word and applying it to our lives. But I think we have to start with being honest with who we are, and know that I'm where I'm at because of the decisions that I've made. And there might be some things that have affected me along the way that were out of my control, but I got to take responsibility for the things that I could control and I chose incorrectly, kind of thing. So I think that's the first step to doing that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because that was like one of the things I was thinking about. And that's so hard to do. Like, own up to the mess that we've created. And even just thinking about, like, even viewing it as mess. Like, if you're struggling to keep a job, okay, there might be opportunities that you might not be qualified for it. Okay, that makes sense. But being willing to say, hey, like, what is it that I have to do to get prepared, right, and to be different? And I don't know, like, I appreciate that answer, because I think it's so hard to take ownership and to take responsibility and to say, hey, I messed up on that one. Oh, hey, I didn't think that through. Like, even for myself, like, I want to blame shift. Yeah. I want to defend myself. I want to put up walls. And I think if we're able, like you were saying, Chase, to be honest with ourselves, and also, I was talking a little bit earlier. I made a comment earlier about, like, taking our cues from the one who created us, as opposed to, like, creating our cues, but knowing that we're not the creator. Right. Like, just being humble to that fact, being honest with ourselves, but also, like, realizing that we have to submit to someone that's better. That's another thought that I have.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like, with that self-awareness or that honesty, like, sometimes that hurts. Mm-hmm. It can be messy, but it can hurt. And it's like, yo, like, I don't want to talk about that. It already happened. Like, what's in the past is in the past. But I honestly don't even think that is all that true, you know, because a lot of times we carry the past with us, and it's, renting all of this space in our minds rent free. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And it can be damaging. That can leak into our relationships. It can leak into our work life. It can leak into when you're at home alone. You know what I'm saying? And I think the best part about the self-awareness is, like, being able to admit, like, wow, God, like, I messed up, and as a result of my decisions or things that have happened to me, I'm hurt. And knowing that God can heal that brings so much comfort for me personally, because it's like, it really brings me to the sense of, like, wow, like, I can't do this on my own. And I've tried and failed. Yeah. But, like, God, like, he just knows how to remove those adhesions on your heart. And sometimes it doesn't happen overnight. Especially if these are, like, long-seated things that you've been going through. Yep. But having him to lean on, having him as your strength, whew, that's strength. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yes. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, like, it's funny, because to your point, I think that, like, a big thing for men, I think, is that, not everybody, obviously, but I think many men have, like, this lone wolf mentality, right? Where there's more of, like, a competitiveness, like, to men. And so I think that sometimes we bring that into our personal lives, not just, like, competitive situations, right? Yeah. And so I think, to your point where you're like, you try to go about it on your own and you can't, I think, like, that was me. Like, growing up, like, I was like, I had, like, the little man mentality where I was, like, 5 foot tall, but I believed I was 6'3", and I was like, I could do it on my own. Yeah. Like, I don't need anybody. Like, I could do it. Yeah. Kind of thing. And so I think that, like, we have that, and we bring that into our lives. And even when we become Christians, like, that is something we cannot like, bring into our walk with God and our community and our family. Because I think that, what I was saying earlier about kind of, owning up to your mistakes, I think that also is going to people that you've wronged and, like, apologizing and kind of working together to figure that out. Yeah. And I think that sometimes can either damage or it can bring people together, but I think the courage is to try to figure it out, kind of thing. And so I think that, you see it with, Jesus choosing his guys, right? Like, choosing his disciples, like, they're all different from different walks of life, and would have in other situations hated each other, right? Like, different types of men, different jobs, the things that they did, like, in any other situation, it would be competitive and they wouldn't like each other. And I think that was part of the point, right? Is that God's like, if we can love each other, if we can make this work and grow the church to what it is now, like, anybody can do it. And that's strength, right? It's coming together with people that are different, that you have different beliefs, you have different backgrounds or whatever growing up, but then you come in a common goal, and, like, now we have this one belief, like, in Jesus. And so I think that can be a roadblock for men, though, right? Is that they're coming in and they're like, oh, you have these type of people in your church, you have these type of people in your church, and they're all together. Like, I don't know if I could do that, And I think that that's something you have to kind of put your pride down and know that we have a common goal, and we need to be brothers and sisters and love one another, if this is going to work. kind of thing. And so I think that can be a huge roadblock too, is just the preconceived notions or the way that you grew up that, you know, Jesus tells us, like, you got to throw that stuff out the window. Yeah. Like, this is a completely new way. Yeah. And you got to be a completely new person, you know, in Christ. So I think that that's something else that's huge.
Yeah, a lot of times I did not talk about my faults, my mistakes, because I feared that if I do share, that someone would use it against me.
Right.
And I think that has to shift, especially as we come into the church. Yeah. Like, knowing that the people next to you, they're rooting for you. They're your family. Yeah. They don't want to see you fall. Right. Like, of course, we're all like messed up. We're all sinful. Yeah. We're not going to find the perfect church. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like when you decide to follow, you're deciding to unite with people who have the same goal, like you said, Chase. So they don't want to use anything against you to hurt you. And of course, you will be hurt. That happens, right? Yeah. But that's like assuming the best about the people you're about to spend time with and you're about to unite with is something that I have to remind myself of, because, like, again, my past is, hey, don't talk about those things because you'll be worse for it. Yeah. But if we're going to be the men that God is calling us to be, then we have to take ownership. And we have to get people in our lives that are going to help us, because if we don't, we're going to stay the same. Yeah. Like, nothing's going to change. Sure. Like, we want to be better, but we continue to do the things that's going to make us worse. Like, so that's something I thought about.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because, to your point, like, when people bring those things to us, like that, when you're saying, like, they love me, like, they're for me, they don't want me to fall, I think sometimes as men too, like, we tend to take things super personally, right? Right? Like, I'm thinking about, like, the Last Dance documentary where Jordan's like, I took that personally, you know, that kind of thing. And then he's like, but it's like, in that mentality, it's like he hated that, right? And to some degree, it's like, cool, like, you can use that, like, chip on your shoulder to move forward. But I think when it's between us, like, as men, especially in the example that you're providing, like, when we're brothers, like, we have to be able to take, like, criticism, and we have to be able to take, like, this person is correcting me because they love me. Yes. You know, it's not out of, again, like, not out of a competitive spirit where it's like, I one-upped you kind of thing. It's like, no, like we're trying to be up here and you're falling down a little bit. I want you to be up here, you know, with all of us kind of thing. And so, and we want to make it, like, we want to make it together to heaven. And so I think, like, kind of putting down that competitive spirit that we have and know that when someone is correcting me and when we're doing the correcting, like, making sure that it is coming out of that place. Because sometimes, like, you can do it out of a competitive spirit when you're trying to correct someone, but not for the right intentions, the right reasons. And that's when we can go back to that, the men we were in the world, where we want to soak it all in and not let it out. Right. Yes. And so I think that we've been a part of the culture that we've built. You know, like I said, like, that's part of taking responsibility for our actions, is that it's not just, you know, what women have done to men or other men, you know, whatever. Like, we've created this culture where we take things personally, so we just soak it in and we don't talk about it. And we have this chip on our shoulder that doesn't need to be there, kind of thing. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of what I thought about when you were sharing that. So
I think one thing I've heard recently was, like, if someone is, what do you call it, constructive criticizing or giving you feedback, let's say that, instead of responding with defensiveness, to respond with curiosity, because clearly it's coming from somewhere. And if you have that mindset of, like, wow, like, this person's trying to help me, and this kind of hurts because it's like, ooh, bro, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're right, but, you know, chill a little bit. But when you respond with that curiosity, I feel like it's also helping you take those first steps of responsibility and taking ownership. Like, okay, this brother or sister brought this up to me. What do you mean by that? Like, what areas has that affected me? Or, you know, how can I do better? You know what I'm saying? And it's like, wow, like, when you have that mentality of, like, wow, like, I can be better for this, like, you know, you're only being refined, you know? So I think that's really cool and something that's helped me.
Yeah. So when you were saying that, I was thinking about, like, earlier in the year, we were kind of, like, learning about these, like, how to live, like, rules to live by. And one of them was, like, assume the person you're talking to knows something you don't. And I think that that's like such a good rule to have, to where it's like, it's kind of the same mentality of like, take the meat, spit out the bones. Like, you can learn something from anyone, you know? Sure. Like, even if they don't know anything else that they're talking about, they might say something that's helpful. And it's like, just because they spew a bunch of nonsense, there might be something you can take from what they have to say. And I think that that's kind of the essence of what you're saying, is like, you know, have curiosity about what people are talking to you about, and truly listen to people. Because that's the other thing, is that I think this is not necessarily a male thing, but it's just a pride thing, to where lots of times we're not listening to listen. We're listening to respond.
Yes.
And so I think that that's something that also creates a culture of being combative, you know, instead of working together to better each other. Yeah. And so I think like taking that mentality of whoever I'm talking to, they have something that I can learn, you know, they know something that I don't. Kind of thing. And so that's what I'm going to try to look for in this conversation, in this interaction, or whatever, whether it's someone I'm really close with, whether it's someone I'm meeting for the first time. Like, what can I learn from this person? What can I gain? And what can I help teach as well? And have humility in that, I think is a huge like rule to live by.
That's one of the things that like came up over and over and over and over when I first got married. I've been married for 3 years. And I just remember like my wife bringing things to me that I need to work on. Yeah. I need to take responsibility for. And it was so hard to just listen out of curiosity and out of like, she's trying to help. Right. She's not trying to hurt me. Yeah. And like, one of the things that I found myself being tempted to do is, okay, you telling me this, but what about the 5 other things you did? like just kind of like, I don't know, building up ammunition. Like building up ammunition and not like listening because you want to grow, because this person's trying to help you. And like one of the disciplines that I'm trying to live by, especially in my marriage, but with people in general, is that when someone brings something up, to not make it about another situation. You get what I'm saying? Like, okay, sure, you did that other thing. And I could talk to you about that later, but it's not about that right now. It's about what you're bringing to me that's going to help me. And I don't know, that's humility right there. And that's hard. That's very, very hard to do. That's something I'm trying to pursue. But that's something I thought of too, like being willing to make it about the situation at hand. And not like, okay, but what about that thing you did? Or what about, you know, why you been a hypocrite, whatever. Like, those are some things that I know that can come up in my heart. For sure. Yeah,
and I think that's such a good point, right? Like, I think a stigma that's on men that I actually really hate is like we just don't listen, you know? Yeah. And I think that sometimes that's true. Like, sometimes we just don't listen. And I think, like, when I was really learning, when I was a little younger, like, to truly listen, like, to listen, not listen to respond. Yeah. And I think men remember this, especially it's something big for women, is like when they're speaking to you, lots of times it's important to, sometimes they don't want you to respond. They just want you to listen, you know, like ask, hey, like, would you like me to respond to this? Or do you want me to just hear you out, kind of thing. And I think like doing that just with each other is really like listening to truly listen and understand, you know, what's happening. And I think lots of times we can be, like kind of tearing each other down without even meaning to, because we're not truly hearing what the person is trying to tell us. We're not hearing that second layer, what you're talking about, of like, we're just trying to gather ammunition to kind of fight back, you know, instead of really hearing what the issue really is. And I think that that's something that with men, we have to do. We have to listen and listen to each other, and work together to kind of work through some of these hurts and these traumas that we've built for ourselves, or that they've, you know, been done to us. And so I think that it kind of starts with this listening ear, like taking that responsibility for what you've gotten yourself into, but then also listening and getting advice and hearing what people are saying and understanding they're not attacking you, kind of thing. And if they are, to voice that, you know, to be honest about that. And so, and not to take the traumas that we've experienced and to put them onto someone else. So I think we're going to wrap up here. But I really appreciate this conversation with y'all. It's been great. I hope that it helps y'all as well. And so we'll see you next time on the podcast. Have a great day.